Hyvää iltaa, hyvät katsojat, ja tervetuloa jälleen Lähi-idän ja Israelin asioiden pariin Israel Studio. Kuluneella viikolla on tapahtunut taas paljon, josta itse asiassa emme tässä ohjelmassa juurikaan tiedä mitään, koska tämä ohjelma on nauhoitettu jo 7. toukokuuta. Mutta itse asiassa juuri tätä ohjelmaa edeltävällä viikolla Israel täytti 77 vuotta. Ja se tietysti on merkkitapahtuma nuorelle valtiolle, joka on jatkuvasti uhanalainen. Monet sen naapureista yrittävät jatkuvasti tuhota sen. Tänään minulla on ilo pitää vieraana israelilaista vierasta. Hän on nimeltään Shaun Sacks ja hän edustaa organisaatiota nimeltä NGO Monitor. NGO Monitor. So, Shaun, welcome to Finland and welcome to Israel Studio.
Thank you very much. It's good to be here.
What brought you to Finland?
Well, I'm here on behalf of my organization, NGO Monitor, to inform the Finnish public and the decision makers about how Finnish funding is impacting on the conflict in my area.
Okay, so we will discuss it a bit later. But Israel just about 2 weeks ago celebrated its 77th independence anniversary. So what kind of celebrations did you have, if any, this year?
Well, I think the celebrations reflected the mood in Israel. As many people may know, on the eve of the celebration, there was major forest fires in Israel, and a lot of the ceremonies, unfortunately, were cancelled. But within a few hours, the fires were put out by the brave firefighting teams from Israel and with assistance from our friends in other parts of the world. And by the afternoon and the late evening of Israel's Independence Day, many people were out celebrating with family, with friends, and I think that reflects the mood in Israel. It's a little somber, we're a little hesitant, but at the end we are still strong and celebrating our independence.
Mm. So was it a question of arsons or what were behind those fires?
At the moment it seems that it was a combination of high winds, unusually high temperatures that led to very dry areas. And even something as simple as a thrown cigarette could lead to a massive fire. Unfortunately, though, it does seem that there were a number of instances where fires were set on purpose by arsonists.
Okay. So before we go to NGO things, I have a question, and I believe that many of our viewers have this question. Where were you on October 7th, 2023?
So October 7th, 2023 was the last day of the festive period in the Jewish calendar and in Israel that starts with Rosh Hashanah, the beginning of the new year. 10 days later, there's Yom Kippur, the Day of Atonement, and then after that is Sukkot, the Festival of Tabernacles, and then that ends with what's called Simchat Torah, the celebrating of the end and the beginning of the Torah cycle. So it's a very long festive period with a lot of dancing and family time and friends. It's a wonderful time. But as the father of 4 teenagers, it gets to a point where at the very end it's a little bit too much. And the Friday night before, my wife and I agreed that we would go to prayers at our synagogue very early in the morning, and my 3 older children would go to a synagogue a little bit further away later in the afternoon, and our youngest would be at home, and he would be fine because nothing terrible could happen. We would come home, we'd have breakfast, and then we would go meet my older children and continue dancing and celebrating. At 7 o'clock in the morning, my wife and I were at synagogue, and the first sirens came out over Jerusalem. And I looked at my wife, and she looked at me, and we both had that same thought of our 10-year-old son is home alone. And so I did something which you're never supposed to do, is I ran outside during the siren with the intention of, well, it was running the few hundred meters to my house to check on my son. And at that very moment, there was the interception of the Iron Dome over Jerusalem. And more than just hearing the interception of the missiles, I actually felt the impact, the reverberation, the impact, the echo. You could actually feel how powerful it was. And I call that my oh no moment, because I realized at that very moment, if there are this many missiles and interceptions over Jerusalem on a festive day, something is very, very wrong. And then, thank God, I made it upstairs to our apartment. My son had already locked himself in our bomb shelter. The rest of the family came back. There were a few more sirens after that, and then we had a very quick breakfast together that included a small shot of whiskey for me and my wife. And then I turned on my phone and realized that Israel was at war, and soon after that I received my first call-up from my commanding officer to say, it appears we're at war, something very terrible has happened in the south, be prepared. I went down to our storeroom, I got my uniform and my equipment, and later that morning I was already with my comrades in arms in uniform, preparing to defend our country.
The day you never you will ever remember that day.
Not only the day, that entire period, almost minute by minute, will stay with me for a very long time.
And since that day, you've been serving in the army?
Yes. Since then, we're now at the 18th month of the war, of which, according to my wife and children, they count it day to day. I have served on and off for nearly 9 months.
Okay. And the war still rages?
The war continues, and unfortunately it seems like it will pick up in the coming days, but we will prevail. Israel will win. I have no doubt about that.
So we also think so and believe so. But about NGO Monitor.
Yes.
First, what is NGO? What does it mean?
So NGO in English is a non-governmental organization. These are organizations that fill in roles in society that are not always covered by governments. Very often we think of charities, but this can also be organizations that do work in the community. And in the case of the organization I work for, we are looking at human rights organizations, often with good-sounding names like Human Rights Watch or Amnesty International or the International Center for Human Rights.
So you've been investigating the money, where it comes and what they are doing with that money that sometimes comes from abroad. I mean, seen from Israeli side.
Yes, and that's exactly what we do. For the last 17 years, my mentor and teacher, Professor Gerald Steinberg, created this incredible organization, NGO Monitor, and our role is to monitor the activities and funding of human rights NGOs that are active in Israel and Palestinian areas, or active internationally, but they work significantly in our part of the world.
How Finland relates to that picture?
So from our research, we have found that Finland is donating, with Finnish aid, upwards of €5 million every year to NGOs that are active in the Israel-Palestinian conflict. And then as a member of the European Union, that is at least another 20 to 25 million euro that go to these organizations.
From Finland originally?
Well, from the European Union, which means that Finland is a donator to those as well.
Okay. But these figures don't include UNRWA?
Correct. So it's very important. The work we do is very focused only on non-governmental organizations and only on human rights groups. It doesn't include major UN organizations like UNRWA, which I know you have spoken about many times and has been discussed on this program. While UNRWA is a problem, that is not part of our mandate. We are a private organization that looks into a very specific area.
Mm. But as you showed up here in Finland, so Finland has a role to play in this game, not only probably in a positive way, but how do you see the Finnish funding into Palestinian NGOs?
So we look at the Finnish funding to Palestinian and Israeli NGOs, and unfortunately what we have discovered is that Finland isn't necessarily playing the role it should be. Finland has the opportunity and I think even the desire to play a positive role, but as of now, we have discovered that much of the funding that comes from Finland is not playing a positive role.
Tell me more.
Okay, so I'll start with the very basic idea that the current Finnish government and its predecessors and the government before that desire a negotiated two-state solution. Now, we can argue what that means, one state, two-state, Palestine, but that is for later.
So negotiated between the Israelis and the Palestinians.
So a negotiated two-state solution of living in peace and harmony, which is a very noble idea. Mm. Unfortunately, that goal is not reflected in where Finland puts its money.
Okay.
And what I mean by that is we have seen a number of organizations that are receiving Finnish aid money, and these organizations do not believe in a negotiated two-state solution. They do not believe in the right of Israel to exist as a Jewish state. They do not see a future for Zionism in the state of Israel. And in some cases, these organizations even appear to excuse the horrible, malicious, disgusting terrorist attack that took place on October 7th.
So is Finland funding terrorist activities?
I wouldn't go that far, because that's a very severe accusation to make. But we could definitely say Finland appears to be giving funding to organizations that don't support Finnish policy of a negotiated two-state solution.
Okay. Can you name some of the recipients?
Sure. So I'll start with what Finland makes public. There is a Finnish program for the defense of human rights and democracy and the promotion of international law, which is a program that has donated about 800,000 euro every year to an organization in Ramallah called the Independent Commission for Human Rights, in the name of democracy and human rights and international law. And this organization, on the day after the October 7th massacre, when in some cases there were still terrorist attacks going on in Israeli kibbutzim, where the bodies of Israelis were still being paraded around parts of Gaza, this Independent Commission for Human Rights, which received significant funding from Finland, put out a statement blaming Israel for the bombings in Gaza. And the next day, the same Independent Commission for Human Rights sent a letter to the United Nations where they explained that October 7th, and I quote, Palestinian factions in Gaza launched the Al-Aqsa storm operation targeting Israeli settlements near Gaza.
Mm-hmm. Settlements.
Settlements. The Israeli kibbutzim and communities and Sderot and Ofakim, the towns, villages and kibbutzim where people were murdered. Some children were murdered. Parents were murdered in front of their children. According to the Finnish-funded Commission for Human Rights, this was an operation carried out on Israeli settlements. Now, that does not sound like it is in line with Finnish policy.
So this particular organization doesn't support negotiated two-state solution?
Well, it doesn't appear to it, because if that is Finnish policy, this organization, in their public records and their documentation and their letters, makes it very clear where they stand. In fact, right now we are at the situation where Israeli leaders are being charged at the International Criminal Court, and the State of Israel is being charged at the International Court of Justice. And Finnish funding is being used in these court cases.
So we are funding the Palestinian, the case Palestinians and South Africa started against Israel and Israeli leaders.
Yes, actually, very much.
Wow.
I'll give you another example. The same organization, the Independent Commission for Human Rights, in the framework of their funding from Finland, supports international law. And they have provided documentation to the international courts against Israel and Israeli leaders. And that is done with Finnish funding because that is part of their mandate. Now, one of the documents that were made public is, according to this organization, in the documents they handed to the International Criminal Court, the war began on October 7th with Israeli airstrikes in Gaza.
Mm-hmm.
That is part of the mandate, and that is part of the money they receive from Finland to promote international law.
So instead of human rights, the Finnish money supports the Palestinian actions of lawfare against Israel.
Yes, very much. Lawfare being the combination of legal warfare against Israel, the right of the State of Israel to exist, and our leadership.
So is this money coming from the Finnish government?
Yes, unfortunately it is.
And how much is it?
So in this case, specifically to the organization we've spoken about, it is a 5-year program that is donated at least €3 million to the International Commission for Human Rights. Mm-hmm. But in general, in this area of human rights, directly from the Finnish government to organizations like this, it's about €5 million every year.
Okay. Wow. So is this the only organization that gets money from Finland in the Palestinian territories, or are there?
No, there are many more. And this is
How many?
So this is where we have a problem. We don't know. And we are the only real research institute looking at this in detail. And we look at funding not just from Finland, we also look at Sweden, Norway, Denmark, the European Union, France, Italy, and many other countries around Europe that have development budgets to Israel and Palestine for human rights. And what we have discovered is that where in most of these countries we can actually follow the train of money from the development agencies in the particular countries all the way down to the conduits, whether it's via the United Nations or via other institutions, down to where the money ends up, which NGO is getting the money. In the case of Finland, unfortunately, it is very difficult for us because the foreign ministry doesn't divulge the entire chain of money. We know some of it that I've spoken about, but very often money goes to the United Nations Development Agency and then to other NGOs.
Are you saying that those other countries are more transparent?
Yes.
About funding than what the government of Finland is?
Unfortunately, the answer is yes. Some governments are not as transparent, but most are more transparent, yes.
Oh. That's a surprise because, you know, transparency has been one of the keywords in Finland for many, many years.
So, yes, transparency is important. And I think what we're noticing in Finland, I don't think it's malicious. Please don't get me wrong that I think anything is being hidden. There is a belief in international bodies, one of them being the United Nations. So Finland provides €3 million to the United Nations Development Program, and the United Nations Development Program takes that money and gives it to NGOs in Israel or the Palestinian Authority. Now, from a Finnish perspective, the money goes to the UN and then it goes to NGOs, and that's being transparent. It won't tell us more than that.
Okay.
But we need to know as NGO Monitor, and I think Swedish citizens need to know.
Finnish citizens.
Finnish citizens, sorry, and Finnish citizens need to know who gets the money after that.
Okay, so it may seem noble that we give money to United Nations, but they are sharing it forward to some questionable organizations in the Palestinian territories.
Yes, that is exactly the problem. And we have seen examples of organizations that claim they get United Nations Development Program funding, which may come from Finland, which may come from other countries, but we can't necessarily match them up because Finland doesn't tell us. And in this case, we've seen some very troubling examples. I can give you a few of them. An organization that we know is receiving UN development funding by the name of Al-Haq. This is an organization that in July 2023 sent a letter to the European Union saying they disagree with the notion of a two-state solution. They disagree with negotiations. They say that, in their opinion, all of Jerusalem belongs to sovereign Palestine. That even, again, going back to July 2023, Israeli leaders should be tried at international courts. And this is an organization that is receiving United Nations funding. We know they're receiving European Union funding. But until now, nobody's questioned this organization and many others like them.
So Finland, the government of Finland has certain principles, which is targeting a negotiated two-state solution between Israel and the Palestinians. But then the Finnish government gives money to Palestinian NGOs that has totally different ideas and visions for the region.
Yes, and that is just some of the examples. Unfortunately, we have other examples too of Finland giving money to organizations that don't seem to be in line with Finnish principles. Another example is following the Oslo Accords, the area of the West Bank, or Judea and Samaria, was divided into areas A, B, and C. Area A under the Palestinian Authority, that would be the major population centers. Area C, which was the majority of the territory, is under Israeli control. And Area B, which is the areas in between, would be under Israeli military control but Palestinian civil control. With the idea being that that is the basis of negotiation.
And Finland recognizes these Oslo Accords?
Absolutely. Finland and the European Union were a party to the Oslo Accords, and very often we hear Finnish and European ministers speak about that is the goal, and that is the framework agreement. But what we have seen is Finland gives money to an apparatus called the West Bank Protection Cluster. And this money then goes to a Norwegian organization called the Norwegian Refugee Council. And the West Bank Protection Cluster, funded by Finland, much of their primary role is to help fund the building of Palestinian infrastructure in Area C. So even though Finland agrees that legally Area C is under Israeli control, the Finnish government is funding a Norwegian organization that is building Palestinian infrastructure against Israeli wishes in Area C. And then when Israel begins demolition orders or legal proceedings against this illegal Palestinian building, Finnish money is used in the legal case to defend the illegal building that is being funded by Finland.
So again, lawfare.
And this is exactly, lawfare, but a different version of lawfare.
And since when Finland has started to fund these ventures?
Well, our organization has been active for 17 years. So that is as long as we've been able to track this information.
So at least 17 years?
At least 17 years in various different forms.
Okay. In addition to the government of Finland, are there any other Finnish organizations who are sending money to the Palestinian organization?
Yes, and this is a harder example. FinChurch, and more particularly FinChurch Aid. They're also funding a number of these Israeli and Palestinian organizations that are politically active, that don't necessarily have Finnish principles. And most troubling is a World Council of Churches volunteer program called the Ecumenical Accompaniment Program in Israel and Palestine, EAPPI. This is an international program. Part of it is with Finn Church that sends volunteers for 3 months to Israel and the Palestinian territories. And these volunteers spend most of their time in the Palestinian areas, being educated or being forced into Palestinian propaganda, and they come back and become the leaders of the anti-Israel movement in their churches. Now, this is supported by the Finnish church. It is funded in some cases by the Finnish government, which supplies funding, and it creates a hostile network against Israel in the Finnish church.
Don't tell me more. Actually, we are running out of time, but this interview and what you just shared was so unpleasant that as a Finn, it was a huge surprise to hear the message you brought from Israel to Finland. So thank you, Shaun, coming to Finland and exposing these, I would say, horrible developments that our government, the Finnish Lutheran Church has been part of. And come again.
Thank you very much. It was an honor and a pleasure to be here.
Thank you. Niin, hyvät katsojat, tämä ohjelma oli sisällöltään hämmentävä ja en olisi voinut kuvitella, mitä kaikkea suomalaiset me verovaroistamme rahoitamme, mitä tapahtuu Lähi-idässä, mitä tapahtuu Israelin ympärillä, Israelin tuhoa tavoittelevat ja toivovat organisaatiot ovat Suomen hallituksen ja luterilaisen kirkon ja kirkon ulkomaanavun rahoituksen kohteena. Tälle täytyy tehdä jotakin, tämä täytyy lopettaa. Niin, kiitos jälleen seurasta ja jatkamme Israel-studion merkeissä ensi viikon lauantaina kello 20. Mutta jos koit, että tämä ohjelma toi sinulle hyviä uutisia, no tämä ei nyt kerta kaikkiaan tuonut hyviä uutisia, mutta että haluat kuulla näitä uutisia jatkossakin, niin mieti sitä, voisitko tukea meitä taloudellisesti, näet ruudussa yhteystiedot, joiden kautta voit taloudellisesti tukea tätä ohjelmaa. Mutta palataan asiaan jälleen ensi viikon lauantaina kello 20. Siihen asti, hei hei!